think there'll be one or two. Anyone who's a director of the growth company, I think might, it's formality, but just technically that's there may be just something to log for the growth company item. And we had that before. Okay, then we come to the chairs.
Yeah, could I declare that interest then, please? I am a board member of the growth company, so I want that interest recorded in the minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Ian. Anybody else in the same place? No. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. There's several of us, Andy, Tim, Mary, myself. So we're all in that position.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? No. Okay. Right. In which case we come to chair's remarks, and what Julie's asked me just to say is that there is going to be a proposal that there should be one more meeting of this group, probably on the 27th of January, to prepare two recommendations for the February CA board. One will be about the potential expenditure around the economic pillar of the Commonwealth Games residual funding, and the second will be around the review of the growth company, both of which need to be examined by this group before they go to the February board. So there's a bit of water to run under the bridge, and that is dependent on the discussions later today, but that's the current intention. Anybody, any hands on that? No. If not, number 5, we come to the minutes then of the 23rd of September. I'll just pause, see if anyone wants to say anything about any of those. Not seeing any hands, so we will press firmly on. Thank you. In which case, number 6 is the economic conditions in the West Midlands. And I'm going to ask Delma from the Black Country Consortium, as ever, to give this update. So Delma, over to you.
Many thanks. Good morning, everybody. Just a brief update in terms of some of the latest headlines. As you'd expect in the current economic climate, with the UK already in recession, facing peak inflation, disposable incomes forecast to fall 7% in the next 2 years, and an unemployment forecast to reach 4.9%. There's quite a lot of red on the dashboard, but there are some positives. It continues to be a time of uncertainty for businesses, but the business activity index, it did rise slightly from a 20-month low of 47.8 in September up to 49.6, still below that 50 growth mark. West Midlands firms really struggling to secure that new business, as you expect clients now are reducing their spending due to these recessionary fears and those financial difficulties, and a bit of a pessimistic outlook at the moment. As we will all be familiar with, those biggest challenges still remain: cost of energy, staffing, supply chain disruption, inflation, and that reduction in consumer demand. But we have seen that resilience across the business space. When you look at the recent business figures, we're starting to see a bit of stability now with the level of closures. Debt still slightly outstripped births, but actually the number of active enterprises across the CA in 2021 actually reached 171,000. So strong growth across the West Midlands CA there, and particularly a large increase in the Black Country of 7.6%. So really positive there. Obviously, in terms of the labour market, a slight uptick again, with claimants still not back to pre-pandemic levels, but those numbers do tend to fall over the festive period. Job postings still remain quite strong. All sectors now back above pre-pandemic levels, but we're starting to see a slight fall now in demand, with total postings down briefly, but still high demand for IT jobs, roles in logistics, warehousing, and engineering and manufacturing. Business base across the Midlands have welcomed the new government's commitment, the approach so far to really getting that stabilisation of the economy that they've asked for, and that focusing on the economic growth. Obviously, in the autumn statement, you'll all be familiar with the confirmation of a number of West Midlands investments going ahead, and that really reaffirmed that commitment to the West Midlands Devo deal, all welcomed greatly by the local business base. And just lastly, just some insights. There was a further census release this week, which looked at the ethnicity profile of our 2.9 million residents across the West Midlands metropolitan area, and we're really seeing significant growth there in the diversity of our population. We now have 39% of the population from minority ethnic groups, double the national average, and a real significant growth from 2011. And both Birmingham, Sandwell, Wolverhampton, Coventry and Walsall in the top 10 local authorities in terms of the proportion of population. I'll leave it there. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
Delma, thank you, and thank you for the all the graphs that went with the papers. So let me just see if anyone wants to ask any questions or any observations on Delma or the material that was circulated. Yeah, Ian.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that some of these stats, when they are measured across the West Midlands footprint, they do disguise some really severe situations that are at a lower level. So the example I'm going to cite is unemployment, which doesn't look too bad when you look at it across the West Midlands footprint. But in Birmingham, the unemployment rate remains more than double the national average, or just under double the national average. It's at over 11%. And you know, it's a real issue, and it's been a real issue for many years in Birmingham. It's a figure that we've not managed to shift in spite of all the resources and effort that may have been put in. It's been pretty consistent around twice the national average for a long period of time now, and we shouldn't lose sight when we're looking at data on the West Midlands platform. We shouldn't lose sight that there are these underlying problems that have persisted for quite some time, and unemployment is the one I would flag within Birmingham.
Very fair, and I'm sure if Ian Brookfield was on the line, he would say actually on youth unemployment, Wolverhampton is the highest in the country. So exactly right. Corinne, would you like to go next?
You're just picking up on Delma's point around the diversity and inclusivity figures and the brilliant richness of our communities. I think one of the amazing things of the Commonwealth Games was how we just told that incredible story about what it is to live and grow up in the West Midlands, and we wouldn't do far wrong, would we, by embedding that message in everything we do, in all of our strategies and all our plan for growth. Because the way we told that story to the world during Commonwealth Games, I thought was perhaps the greatest success of the whole thing. So I just think it's championing these stats, championing our diversity, championing the difference in our communities is what makes us us. So I think it's a really important thing to celebrate.
Well said. I'm sure everyone would agree. Well said. Ian, see?
Yeah, I just want to follow Ian's remarks and, well, support the issue of, you know, unemployment in some localities. And of course, the band that Ian's referred to goes straight through North Solihull. Likewise, despite efforts over many years, they're difficult to shift. And, you know, I would just add to it that this is the importance of looking at different ways of tackling some of these, you know, on a much more localized basis, rather than this, you know, authority by authority or function by function or government department by government department. Hence the need to look carefully at those areas and how we can think differently to bring about change.
Thank you. Thank you. Julie, you're next.
Yeah, just wondering if it would be helpful for board if we brought a paper or a presentation next time which did a bit of a deep dive into those cohorts, communities that we know are much more affected, and set out some of the ways that we're hoping to support with local partners on that.
I think it would. And can I nudge you on one thing, Julie? Because obviously, oh dear, there's some drilling in the building I'm in. That's not going to be very good if that goes on for this meeting. Just nudge you, because obviously this very much links, and I'm not saying it's the universal panacea, but links to our ask in the Trailblazer Devolution deal around the employment support. Because what we ask, we all know this, that the areas with the highest levels, the individuals concerned, need much higher levels of support to prepare for the labour market. And I don't necessarily think that is acknowledged enough in what's being offered. So I'd like, if we could do that, that would be good, Julie. Yeah. Okay. Ian, back to you.
Yeah, just to absolutely support that what's been said, but it goes beyond these things, the connectivity between education, skills, health, and all these things. It's all pulls together, and I think for us to focus on it in support of well, what we're putting forward in terms of East Birmingham, North Solihull is really important and opportune.
Thank you all. Correct. Not seeing any other hands, let me just pause, otherwise we'll move on. No, okay, thank you. Okay, so the first specific paper then, number 7 on the agenda, is the West Midlands Growth Company Review. Now, for this, just so we know, I think we're joined by Katie Trout and Matt Hammond from the Growth Company. I know, Matt, you'll both want to comment in a bit, but I think, Julie, you are going to start off introducing the paper.
Yes, and I might ask Tim to help me as well as one of the co-sponsors of this. So if you remember, last time we talked about some work ongoing to oversee a review linked to the broader economic functions piece. That's now underway. We have draft terms of reference for people to comment on, but also setting out some of the sequencing events. So we know there's been a short-term funding pressure, so we think we've come to a good place on that. That's happening in parallel to the broader conversation around future form and function. Tim, you might want to say more, and I can pick up then on some of the process points, if that's okay.
Sure. Thanks, Julie. As Julie said, the review's been sort of against quite a sort of moving backdrop, really, it's fair to say, both in terms of potential sources of funding for the company moving forward, integration of LEPs, future of SBS, etc. But I think there's an awful lot of colleagues have come together in a really sort of pragmatic, collaborative way to find a solution to the short-term funding pressures to ensure that the company can satisfy its requirements as a going concern, because that came on the back of conversations with leaders and the mayor at a few weeks ago, where again there was a collective reiteration that the future of the company is critical for the region, and frankly it's never been more important to have the company doing the work it has been doing. So I think there's as Julie alluded to, there's a process underway in relation to the funding via investment board, heading to CA board, I think on the 16th, which will give some assurance around that sort of first conversation around funding, alongside confirmation, hopefully, of some of the aspects that will be part of that sort of funding solution, namely issues related to Commonwealth Games underspend and shared prosperity fund. So I think we've kind of ticked the first box, which was a short-term funding solution. Perhaps in some ways the more fundamental conversation is around the priorities and focus for the company moving forward, and I guess the reality is, to a degree, that's dependent on the funding envelope the company has in terms of the scope of activity, and I think we've also recognised that for some of us and for many authorities who are part of the board, they've seen visibility to an awful lot of work that's been ongoing over the sort of course of the summer, really, on the back of the Commonwealth Games, about performance impact and frankly the opportunity that has come on the back of all of that in terms of lead generation and some of the opportunities. I think the process we've put in place is to ensure that all of the local authorities are engaged in that functional review through a grouping of the economic development directors from each of the local authorities, working in conjunction with chief execs, feeding up to leaders, etc., so that all of the authorities are in a place where they've got the opportunity to contribute to that functional review in terms of emphasis and focus and priorities moving forward, and to make sure that everyone's got the same visibility to the work that's been done. So that's ongoing, and that's the group that I'm attempting to sort of lead, and we're looking now. We've got hopefully some certainty around some of the funding to complete that with some pace early in the new year. So frankly, we can get on to the business of making sure that we can undertake the work and we can capitalise on not only the stuff that came on the back of the Commonwealth Games, but some of the exciting opportunities that were in the mix pre. So hopefully everyone is assured that their respective authorities have a voice in that conversation, and it will come through back to this board in advance of going onwards to CA board and obviously into the growth company governance itself. Andy, I think you're on mute.
I am, because they started drilling again. So let's fingers crossed. So Tim, thank you. So I should have said right at the beginning, the purpose of this today is really for us to get comfortable with the terms of reference for the work that's been done. So that's what I'm really looking for contributions on, because I hope this isn't tempting fate. I think we had a good, thorough conversation about the funding issues at the Mayor and Met Leaders meeting 2 weeks ago, but this is the new material for today, that review content. I'm just going to pass to Matt Hammond. So if you want to say anything at this point, I know Ian Courts is waiting to come in, but Matt, just let me go to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, and thanks to the board for affording us some time on this subject this morning, and to those that have already been involved in providing their time, expertise, and insight into the, as you say, and essentially the scope of the review and the work so far. I think it's probably quite important just to reflect, as Tim, as Julie, and as Corin did earlier as well, that the story of the region was told very well through the course of 2022, which is nearly over. And as I said, and this is purely by coincidence, we had a West Midlands board company board meeting yesterday. As I said at the conclusion of that meeting, when we discussed this review, there's probably no better time for us to review the functions, the governance, and the funding of the growth company than this particular moment in time when it's been tested through 2022. And essentially, we make sure we are fit for purpose for the region and the growth ambition of the region overall across all the local authority areas for 2023 and beyond. So the review is welcomed. Obviously, the terms of reference we have a visibility and input into. We think they are thorough, and we welcome the fact that there are many different participants to that review to effectively reset for the region. That's what this is really about. The funding conversation, I won't go into other than to say that we recognise in the growth company, I think, two salient features. Firstly, we're all facing financial headwinds, and there is therefore a balance of what can be achieved. We also, at a financial level, have a time window which we have now managed within the growth company board and through its audit and risk committee to be contemporaneous with your own timelines, particularly through concluding this review in February. To be clear on why that is important, we have extended our filing deadline for the accounts of the growth company to the maximum we could go to is March. It's not comfortable normally to extend the filing deadline, but it does pertain to the situation here that we've got, which is just a slight crossover in timelines of this review, plus some central government matters, and of course the normal reporting timelines that we're working on. So I think we can get through those. We recognise there is no magic source of money other than perhaps what everybody did work to create across the region, which is the surplus ultimately from the games and how that might be dealt with as well. In terms of the ongoing work, there are obviously a couple of different levels of review of the work as well. There is effectively a steering group, an executive day-to-day control of it, and then a review group which consists of Andy, yourself, Councillor Ian Brookfield, and myself. So I think in terms of the rigour of the review as well, and the open-mindedness of all to making whatever changes we feel appropriate to governance, structure, and how that works will be thoroughly thrashed out over the course of the coming weeks. I'm happy to take any questions likewise.
Thank you, Matt. Let's turn to Ian C first.
Yeah, quite simply, my understanding is there are going to be workshops with local authorities from January. And I understand we have one to look at how the growth company can complement and enhance existing activity, and I think that's excellent. I'm personally not as familiar as probably I should be with the work of the growth company, but there's a lot of emphasis during these conversations on finance and the money. And as you said, Andy, we had a discussion about that. Quite frankly, if value is created, we're going to have to find some money, because whether it's growth, whatever does it, there is a job here of attracting inward investment and managing this, which is key to what we do. It's why we were set up, to bring together the value of the West Midlands and to create inward investment. So I hope we can have some productive discussions on this, and and really all get something out of it. So I look forward to those discussions.
Thank you, Ian. Next hand was Corin, back to Coventry.
Hi, Andy. Thanks. Yeah. Terms of reference are good. Thank you for that. I think that the key to this review is going to be finding balance the whole time, isn't it? How we create a strong regional voice and regional resource, but at the same time, how we support and scale up really good quality local provision as well. And I think that'll be the key to this. And I think as part of the review, it's a patchwork of business support across the West Midlands. We acknowledge that. And some issues are best dealt with at a regional level, the inward investment, the big trade, some of the big business account management. But there's brilliant stuff taking place at local level as well, Andy, at local authority level, right across the patch. And as much UK SPF money goes into a central resource, it means less money coming down to a local resource as well. So how we balance that, we look at that during this review process will be really important.
Thank you, Corin. And next, we go to Deputy Mayor Councillor Bob Slate. Bob.
Yes, thank you. It's in relation to the plan for growth and the work that the Combined Authority commissions the Growth Company to do, particularly I think leading to the point that Ian Court's just made with regard to location coordination for inward investment across the region. And I think there is a conversation to be held from a KPI perspective, which is also something we need to pick up, just exactly how effective that location coordination role that the Growth Company performs in relation to Combined Authority, which it commissions, actually delivers, because we do need to be able to spread those locations across the West Midlands in the appropriate level. But the conversation with local authorities in that regard is absolutely crucial, so that we do get a balance, I think, as Corin just said, of investment across the West Midlands, so that we do drive growth across the geography of the Combined Authority. So I'll be looking for that as the growth plan goes forward, and clearly the reporting mechanisms with the KPIs that the Growth Company brings. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Next to Mike Wright as Chair of the Innovation Board. Mike.
Thank you, Andy. Just an external observation to the terms of reference. I wonder whether there's some opportunity to do some benchmarking as well, particularly with similar activities outside of the UK. I mean, there are some good, I know there was a benchmarking trip done to Canada and North America. I wonder whether that would be helpful as well.
It's a very good point. I know Ian Ward's got his company may come to this, but I'm very keen, Katie, you've got the pen, that this has got hard KPIs in it. We've been, I think, a little soft in some of this, and with Mike's right, we do need to be really precise in what we're looking for and then report against those numbers. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mike. And then to Ian, NW.
Thank you. It's on that point, and as we discussed earlier this week, we've got to have KPIs that we can measure the performance of the Growth Company against. But for me, there's also the issue of the Growth Company not marking its own homework. In the past, it's never been clear to me whether some of the things that the Growth Company have claimed the benefit of, whether they would not have either happened anyway, or they've been levered in Birmingham's case by the City Council itself rather than activity of the Growth Company. So I think we've got to have the right metrics to measure, but we've also got to ensure that these things are being measured in a fair way. So I don't think it helps if the Growth Company is marking its own homework.
And you know, I agree with that. So just follow that up, Matt. I am very keen that the local authorities come to the table once this review is done to say that they are happy to sign off what is there. Very important the MAs use this once to get to that point. And Tim, in terms of how it's constructed, I think we must try to achieve that.
And if I could come in on that, Andy, as well, in terms of the work that's going on, the workshops that we're doing regionally and the individual discussions, that's very much a flavour. I think people are very keen to support the function, but also very keen to have a much more decisive view of what happens and how we can all see the progress that's being made. So I think that's a very clear theme. I would add as well, particularly for councillor Courts, but others on the call, we're doing the workshops with officers, but if leaders, members did want us to come out and talk to them, really keen to do so.
Good, lovely. Tim, you were next.
Just wanted to add to that, Andy, really, just to reassure everyone that there are some very robust conversations going on. This is by no means just a sort of paper exercise. There are some pretty fundamental kind of conversations which I think are needed and necessary to get us to a place where we're all content with that future direction and can focus on the work in hand. So just to assure you that it's by no means a sort of a light touch exercise. It's taken a lot of time.
Yeah. Good, and let's go to Sandwell next, to Peter.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Ian about the the KPIs that they need to be robust. And I'm going to be boring and take it back to the funding issue on page 28, where we're talking about devolving some of the Commonwealth Games budget down to the growth company. I think we've got to have really proper, robust outputs agreed for any money that's given, such as this. We need to see benefits that go across all areas of the combined authority with this money. It was a combined authority Commonwealth Games, and we need a legacy that gives outputs and is evenly spread across the combined authority. Just going back to page 27, where you're talking about trying to save costs and talked about non-pay expenditures such as rent and facilities to secure value for money. Can I say, whilst there probably is an inclination for the growth company to be based in Birmingham, we're more than happy to find a cheap base in Sandwell. We are doing a major assets review where we've got excess assets here, and we're quite happy to host the growth company in Sandwell if they're prepared to be based here.
I'm sure they will appreciate your offer. Okay, so Matt, I'm going to come to you to respond, but Peter, I'm going to come to you, Matt, but just let me say one thing. What we are trying to get to here, the way this is all being choreographed, is the financial decision comes at the same time as the decision on a form and function, as Katie used to tell me when my days, so that you've got both half of this together, and that's what should give you confidence in taking the financial decision, Peter. That's where we're aiming, basically. But Matt, back to you. You want to respond?
Yeah, we'll just maybe wrap up with a couple of comments, one from me, one from Katie. But the observation I'd make is that, as Tim has just highlighted, this is a pretty rigorous review, and the rigor of that goes to our credibility as a region. If you think about the inward investment pipeline that we now have in front of us, it is 3 times the size of what it was 12 months ago. It's almost 1,000 inbound projects, and we can rightly, in working together, show the benefits of that in terms of added pipeline, for example, coming through from the West Midlands India Partnership Programme, and that visit, and Canada was referenced earlier, and so on and so forth. The reality is, to convert that pipeline of, as a number of others have commented, of strategic investors into the region, is the growth company that is best placed to deliver against that. And our credibility as a region comes from working together, but through some central funnels that the growth company creates in terms of origination and conversion of those opportunities. So we have I think we have probably the best opportunity now to create. Everybody talks about legacy from games. Ours is an inward investment legacy from the games, which creates jobs, creates inclusive growth across the region, and that's the challenge that's in front of us now. But Katie, what do you want to add?
Just wanted to build on a few of the comments from leaders to say we very much see ourselves as the regions, as your growth company, and we want to make sure that all the activity that we're undertaking is focused on delivering priorities for the region and for local places as well. So we'd really like to use this review process to get clarity from your local authorities about what you would like us to be focusing on, so that we know we're targeting the right activity, and also to have a really sophisticated set of KPIs as to how we measure that as well. And I think that's really important. In the past, I think they've perhaps been a little bit too blunt and very high level in terms of jobs and GVA, and I think we need to get to a much more sort of granular level there, so that you can really hopefully see the added value that we're bringing, and to Councillor Ward's point, make it very clear where we have assisted in landing an investment, and where it would have happened anyway. And also really to reflect on the balance of activity required across the region. So for some areas, I think inward investment will certainly be very, very high on your list of priorities. For others, and I know we've had recent conversations with Sandwell, you're very much wanting us to focus on attracting capital into your areas as well. And I think we need to be able to show that sort of different level of importance of activity across the region, and hopefully the review will help to get us to that point.
Good. That's very reassuring, Katie. Thank you. Anybody else want to comment? Because it's been good contributions. Thank you. And I think it sets us up well for the piece of work that's going to be done. But in the absence of any other comments, I think we're agreeing the piece of work, and we're all clear that we're aiming to come back to the February CA board, hopefully to sign off the work content and also the funding, if people are so minded. And Matt, I appreciate what you have done to allow the timetables to come together with the delay of the filing as well. Small point, but I do appreciate what you've done there. So thank you. Everybody happy with that? Thank you. Yeah, sorry, one hand. Yeah, no, it's not a hand, it's a thumbs up, which is great. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. And Matt, Katie, thank you. We will next move then to number 8, which is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Now, what this is, and Paul's going to take this, this is actually just an updating of the work that's gone on since the board decision on the UK SPF, but on the paper on page 35, there is one approval required. So Paul, can you introduce it and make sure we come to that approval? Thank you.
Happy to, Andy. Thank you. I think just before I start the item, I wanted to thank all the local authorities and Greater Birmingham Solihull LEP Growth Hub for all the hard work that they've been doing since the board approval at the end of October. This is very much a team effort with all 7 local authorities leading on a work stream around delivering UK SPF business support. So in many ways, I'm just the front man here, Andy, and all the thanks and efforts are with everybody else. I'll broadly take the paper as read, but I just wanted to draw attention to 2 main things. One, item 3.2 around the principles that the working group are working towards. I think these are all very important and great that we've had endorsement from the working group. I'll just cover them very briefly. So building on what we've got already in the region, but not being beholden to it, so improving on it. Really not being driven by the needs of providers, which perhaps historically we might have been a little bit in the region. Focusing on delivering real world outcomes rather than what DLUC are telling us they want us to deliver. And then perhaps the most important is providing that consistency of service to West Midlands businesses, no matter where they are based. I also wanted to draw attention to 5.3 on where we're looking to spend in the near future, subject to the funding agreement, and that is specifically around the first item, where I just want to reassure board members that I'm not proposing that we spend £400,000 on a website. This is really about the CRM system, licenses associated with that, and some of the digital diagnostic tools that we'd use as a front door for businesses to access business support. All of which is costly. CRM licenses alone are quite eye-watering. And then I just wanted to raise one final thing, and then I'll open it up, which is really the activities listed in 5.3 are dependent on receiving the funding agreement, which we have yet to do, and there is also potentially some risk around reprofiling, which again is in line item 5.4 and 5.5. I'll pause there for questions.
Yeah, that's clear. Okay, so it's a good update on what's gone on since, but let me see if anyone wants to comment on what you've presented. I hope it's fairly non-controversial, because basically you've done what we said we'd do at the board. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Ian.
Thank you. Oh, just a second, my phone's ringing now. Right, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to raise the issue of the management and administration allocation. It's not referenced in this report, but I'm told there is 4% has been allocated for administration of this, and that is to be spread in an equal allocation of 275,000 for each local authority. Now, that sounds very fair and equitable. However, it does in actual fact lead to some disadvantaging of areas, given the complexity and the scale of the programme that's being managed. So if I use Birmingham and Solihull as an example, so Birmingham's programme is 42 million, Solihull's programme is 8 million. So they have this equal sum of money for management and administration. Although it seems on the surface to be equitable, in actual fact, it's not. I just wonder whether this matter could be the subject of some further discussion by finance directors across the West Midlands.
Probably more appropriate for Julie.
Yeah, if I pick that up, Councillor Ward, you will know that the funding methodology has been controversial in terms of the overall allocation. And so with the 4%, we did look at a simple split. We have looked at it through the FD group, and Birmingham did make a case for having a greater share of that funding. I have to say the other 6 authorities didn't agree and felt that regardless of the amount, you still need to manage programmes. So in the end, the majority vote carried it. So we're sticking with the apportionment, and obviously we'll continue to look at how this works throughout the programme, but that was the decision of the FDs.
Okay, but it's clearly, I can understand why they vote that way, because who's going to give up any money? But it's not fair. So I want to move that this is referenced back to the FDs for a further conversation.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Okay, and you will take that responsibility for taking that forward then, Julia?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's clear action. Next hand then, I see Simon Phipps from Dudley. Simon.
UK SPF programme, not just necessarily what's in this report. So in particular, with regard to the business funding that's happening this financial year, in Dudley, we're focusing kind of our allocations on recruiting some more people to try and bolster actually the amount of people that can actually respond to all the requests we're getting at the moment, which is something we desperately need to do, because at the moment we can't really get around everyone that wants to try and access that support. But we need to do this by the 1st of April, otherwise I think we might lose spending, the funding. So I just want some reassurance that that's going to be worked on at pace to make sure that that funding is guaranteed and delivered to us in time to be able to get that. And then just another wider thing about UK SPF and the kind of lack of support that it can be provided within it for 16 to 18-year-olds. We talked about earlier on that the wider West Midlands region has an issue with youth unemployment. In Dudley, it's a very similar sort of story. Although we do have a decent number of apprenticeship starters, I'm probably sure that's maybe quite similar everywhere else. We don't necessarily sort of like have as many as we used to. We also have an issue with local businesses saying we just can't get young people who are ready for work coming out of education, and apprenticeships are a good way of being able to try and turn those people around and get them ready for work. So I just wanted to sort of like see if there's any scope to see what we can do to try and get more spending towards that younger cohort of people, but also as well if there's anything that we can do to try and at least explore how we can bring forward some of the people and skills funding that we can't spend until next year, because that's a big gap. That's a really big gap. And if we need to start sending these messages upwards, towards the government, then I think we need to start. Well, I'm sure we maybe already have, but we definitely need to do so. So yeah, just some concerns from Dudley's side of thing, but the report's no problem with the report and everything, and yeah, just encouraging to get on with it as quickly as we can.
Let me just get other I know your response to that, Julie, but just let me get the other hands first, but because we have already started to act on that, Simon. Peter, you're next.
Yeah, I'd like to make several points and ask some questions relating to the table in 5.3. First of all, the branding, cost for branding. I mean, I've no doubt this is going to go out to a firm of consultants, and you know, to me, that's not necessarily money well spent. And £100,000 is not just a drop in the ocean. To my mind, something like that needs to either be done in-house, or maybe we should ask a few of the universities where they've got marketing departments to actually have some kind of competition and let them come back with some branding for the company and give them a small prize for doing so. I mean, that's a different way of doing it, isn't it? The investor readiness training program. How are we going to ensure that the training program's what's needed? That's the first thing. Are we going to ensure that the take-up and delivery is even distributed across all the 7 Mets? The decarbonisation programme. I'm fighting for the Black Country here. It's known that the Black Country has the most energy-intensive businesses, and what I'm going to ask here, is this going to be targeted on need? That's the question. And lastly, the cluster growth programme, the support that's going in there. Can you tell me which industries are going to be supported in this cluster growth programme? Which are we targeting specifically? That's my questions.
Thank you, Peter. We'll come back to them in just a sec. And next to Corinne.
Hi, Andy. Yeah, just a couple of points. One is the regional website and CRM system. I think we're very brave to go down this route. I think we've tried before with these sort of things. I'm assuming that a real tight control can be kept over the cost of this, because it can spiral out of all control when we do try and create these regional multi-agency data sharing and CRM systems. I know what exists at the moment, but how we beef that up. The second one, I'm assuming the answer to this is a yes as well. But how well have we been able to match the UK SBF programme with other regional and international funding streams? Because particularly around decarbonisation, God, we need to do that. But I bet there's money we can match. And my third point is, it's about the commissioning process. It'd be really cool to have a presentation quite soon about some timetables and how agencies bid in to deliver some of this work, only because early in the new year, lots of our funding streams end at a local level, and we're going to be losing really good staff soon, unfortunately. So understanding how we can tempt them to stay because we're bidding in for things will be a key part of our business model. That's me.
Thank you. So, Julie, I'm going to ask you and Paul to try to answer the questions, but I think there's an underlying point that comes out, that there's a lot of interest in the detail here. We do have a task and finish working group on this, and I think we've got to just reflect on how we get that group to be informing those responsible in local authorities as well, because it's understandable that everyone wants to know this, but we've got to respect the group we've put in place.
So just on that as a process point, what we can do is, with the minutes of this meeting, circulate, because there are several different work streams looking at different individual areas. So one on decarbonisation, for example, one on CRM. So what we can do is circulate who chairs it, each of the local authorities chairs one, and who the members are, so you can see, and clearly if other people want to get involved in a way that doesn't compromise any future bidding, that would be very welcome. So happy to do that. If I hopefully pick up all of the points, Paul, jump in if you think I've missed anything. In terms of, coming back to an initial point, spend on employment, particularly the next 2 years, yes, we have written recently from Councillor Brookfield and the Mayor back to the new Minister to challenge this again. We think, particularly given the labour market challenges that Delma described and people discussed earlier, not being able to spend on employment support is critical for this region. We've got to keep flagging it. In terms of spending this year at risk, it's really difficult. We're in the same position, and again, we flagged this with ministers. It's a national position. No one has had their plan agreed yet. So the view from officials is actually no one is spending. So our expectation, and officials do get this at DLURC, our expectation is there will be funding flexibility, because frankly, no one is spending in year one. So that is a challenge. In terms of Dudley's specific need to recruit around business advisors, that is pertinent to the item later on, LEP integration, because we think there is resource in the region, and we might pick that up as a separate conversation with colleagues at Dudley. And then finally, on the apprenticeship point, the skills point, and it does refer to, I think, Corinne's suggestion as well. What we've tried to do where possible is make sure that if there are other funds available, we use them. So again, we could very happy to have a conversation with colleagues in Dudley about how we might look at things like the apprenticeship levy or some of our skills funding. We don't have anything 16 to 18, but there are things that we might be able to do to support, particularly on that apprenticeship agenda. So very happy to pick that up if that's helpful. Coming on to Councillor Hughes' point, yes, absolutely. In terms of website, please be assured these are ballpark figures. We are working with a regional group on this. We are absolutely determined to get good value for money on everything we do. And similarly, in terms of the programmes that you talk about, yes, very much demand-based, need-based. I have to say, and I say this all the time with SBF, there's not enough money. And coming on to Corinne's point, there's going to be a real cliff edge when we realise that as the RDF schemes run out and SBF kicks in, there is a huge gap between what was invested and what we have got to spend. And that's painful. There's just not enough money, and particularly in this area, particularly given the circumstances. So really incumbent on us to make sure that whatever we do it really, really well, and we complement existing activities. And that's why, again, doing this work by task and finish groups takes longer, but we think it's the right thing to do because we absolutely have to make sure it's complementary to existing local activity and it doesn't duplicate, because we can't afford to do that. And on the cluster piece in particular, Councillor Hughes, that relates back to the plan for growth. So those clusters that we identified across all of the region that we believe will bring good jobs for citizens, those are the clusters that we're focusing on. So that there's a piece of work still to do on what that gets you, but it's very much coming back to, I think, the point Councillor Slay made earlier, that we really have to link into that plan for growth. But yes, on the CRM, Corinne, absolutely. The intention is to use one of the existing CRMs. There are a couple that are currently in use, and look at how we roll that out rather than starting completely from scratch. But just the cost, as Paul said, of licenses, for example, we're trying to make sure we take that hit regionally so we can support that local activity. And yes, TDD is obviously that trailblazer thing is in tandem. So if we do get monies in from that, then clearly that frees up some of the SBFs. So trying to look at it all in the round. I hope I've answered everybody's point.
I think very thorough, Julie. Thank you. And just to reiterate what Julie said, the contact with the task and finish group to make sure everyone's comfortable is, I think, where we must go with this as well. Okay. In which case, I think, in a sense, we've had the very conversation about the second point on page 35, the approval. So I'm taking it then, as everyone's asked their questions, colleagues are comfortable with the way forward then. Not seeing any hands. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely. We move on now then to point 9 on the agenda, which I'm looking forward to, which is the plan for growth update. And for this, there's the what you might call the general paper, which get this right, Andy, that I think Paul Edwards is going to present. But I'm also pleased to say we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into one of the sectors, almost as an example of how we might go about this going forward. And first up is going to be the creative content and production sector. And we're going to be joined by Ed Shedd and Susie Norton of Create Central to really update us how they are going about bringing this cluster forward. So, Paul, I think you're going to kick off, if I've understood correctly, and then we'll pass to Ed, I think it is.
Yes, I'll be very, very brief, Andy. So really, it's to demonstrate, I suppose, two things: to really get some sense from the board as to whether this is what you want to see in the future from other clusters in terms of reporting, and the paper talks in 4.2 to the kind of success measures we might try and hold some of our clusters to. And Ed and Susie have, over the last 3 years, I think, demonstrated some of that, or a great deal of that, I should say. And we'll talk to that in a moment. The other thing I wanted to say about clusters more generally before I hand over is a lot of this work is building on activity that's already been done. It's not from a standing start at all. So it's by the LEPs, by the growth company, and by industry bodies themselves. So as we see this isn't about the CA and the local authorities claiming credit. It's about industry and how industry are taking this forwards. I'll pause there and hand over to Ed and Susie to do the interesting things.
Okay. And if anyone's got any comments on the general paper, we'll come back to them at the end. So, Ed, would you like to kick off?
Brilliant. And I think we've got a presentation that we want to show. So, Joseph, if you could go to the first slide. and yeah, move on to.
Yeah, we've got it.
Move on to the next slide. Brilliant, and thank you for allowing us to present again at the board. I'm in a hotel room in La Défense in France, so the broadband is not brilliant here. So hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. What I'd just like to do is kind of set the scene and then hand over to Susie. I mean, what was it like before Great Central? I think there's four kind of key points that we wanted to make. There was generally a lack of coordination. You had lots of people competing for funds, duplicating effort, and not joined up. That's easy to say, but it actually has a kind of material impact on the efficiency with which you can grow a sector. That led to opportunities being missed, and of course, most notably we always refer to the bid to Channel 4 HQ move, but there were lots of other examples where that lack of coordination, people were energetic and enthusiastic, but there was a lack of coordination, and we kind of missed opportunities. There were low levels of investment, both in terms of getting talent into the industry, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of development funds. So, even though there was energy and enthusiasm for the sector, actually we were missing opportunities. We weren't getting the levels of investment that we require. And there was a lack of commissioning. I mean, quite frankly, certainly in the TV industry, there were more Mancunian accents on TV, Bristolian, Welsh, and there was a resulting talent drain. I mean, one of my favourite stats that I like to use is run a little quiz about outside London, which region has the most creative personnel in terms of volume of numbers. How many people does each region have? And to say, can you tell me who that is? And most people don't realise that is actually Birmingham. It's just that we've there was talent drain out of Birmingham and West Midlands region into the other regions. So it was a slightly discombobulated world before. If we move on from pre-2019 onto the next slide, the beauty of the Create Central model is it really works well as a public-private partnership, if you like. It's a trade body like no other. We have some fantastic industry luminaries on the board. I won't go through them all. You'll recognise, some or most of them. But what that allows us to do very early on, actually, was to set a strategy that everyone could get behind within the region, and importantly, not that everyone would just agree with, but everyone on the board, committed to driving forward and using their kind of personal and corporate influence to generate excitement, generate movement in the right direction, and get more and more people involved. So this is not just a side of kind of pretty faces. It is actually one of the key reasons that Create Central has been able to move things forward. Working really well in tandem with the public sector. I mean, I've really felt the support from the public sector, and we've got strong kind of sense of direction from the industry itself. And if we moved on to the next slide, we've then been able to kind of go one stage further, and we've kind of tasked these fine 10 initial people as champions. And we've allowed them to speak in their own voice, but because they've been part of shaping the narrative for the region, they know what they want to say, and it's kind of unified. And they are, standing up and talking about the region, the brilliant sort of diversity of the region, the strength of the region on many occasions throughout the year. And you hear people talk about the West Midlands region more and more, both within the region across the region and outside the region, and we intend to increase the number of champions. But they've been really helpful. They've got a really strong voice, and they cut through in a crowded market, and suddenly people are starting to take notice. And when we were evaluated at the end of year 2, one of the comments on the evaluation was that we had become the voice of the region, and I think it's partly because of the last 2 slides that I've showed you. There's a real sense of belief. There's a real sense of determination to move forward. If we moved on to the next slide, again, these are just examples of where the executive board and the champions have been plying their trade, if you like. I won't go through all of these, but you can see activity at the Creative Cities convention, at the launch of the BBC partnership, where we talked about the fact that MasterChef is coming back to Birmingham, to be produced in Stephen Knight's Digbeth log, and so many more activities. There's just a sense of excitement and activity that is tangible and is noticed by people, again, both within the region and outside the region. If you moved on to the next slide, I mean, this is my last slide before I hand over to Susie. We believe it's been a small investment with a big return, and Susie will kind of articulate why we believe that. We believe the cluster model has delivered on its initial promise. Again, in the BOP analysis, the majority of respondents to the survey that they put out said the things that happened in the region would not have happened without Create Central. That's not to say Create Central did them, but that we just galvanised activity. And another quote was, the strength of the Create Central members has helped Create Central to secure legitimacy with the key agencies in the region and beyond. Now we're only funded to a tune of £100,000 per year from the West Midlands Combined Authority, but we believe that it's resulted in some fantastic tangible achievements. And I'll hand over to Susie to talk through those.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks. Next slide, please, Joseph. Hello, everyone. So that 100,000, just to be clear, that's kind of core funding. We've been lucky enough to secure some additional project funding through the Combined Authority. But what that's done is enable us to put in place, or Ed, I would say there's a top team of specialists. The idea was that we didn't want to, or the board did not want to, create a new regional screen agency with a chief executive and a kind of senior management team and lots of overhead. We've got an agile team of specialist consultants who all work with us, but they are experts in their field. They're well connected to industry, and they are able to deliver, as I say, in an agile way, which means that we can grow the team, reduce the team as we need to. Next slide, please. And what that's meant in the last 12 months, particularly, first a couple of years we were putting the investment in, and we've been able to convert a lot of that into some real, as Ed's favourite phrase, tangible and remarkable things. Yes, there is Birmingham on this slide, of course. There was a strategic decision around the infrastructure investments, particularly the Creative Content Hub in Digbeth, and with the BBC partnership and their commitment to a £50 million hub in Digbeth. That was a strategic decision by our members and by industry, because they felt that they needed, because of that lack of investment over the previous years, to build that production base up. That resulted in partnerships not just with the BBC, but with other public sector broadcasters as well. Channel 4 came back to town, very happy to do that. We've also now got partnerships emerging with Channel 5, ITV and others. But actually we can then start to see the impact of that far beyond Birmingham. So Create Central, our partnership with Wolverhampton through the Screen School, which is a fantastic new £5 million facility there. We've been able to bring the public sector broadcasters into Wolverhampton. We see Lenny Henry, so Lenny as one of our champions. he announced a writers festival, which is focusing on regional writers from the West Midlands, but that is going to be launched in Dudley, and that will be an annual event for Dudley. So we can start to see the impacts beyond Birmingham. If we could go to the next slide, please. And you'll see, particularly outside of Birmingham, is our focus on innovation. So we are part of the virtual innovation team, which means that we represent the creative industries along with 12 other high growth sectors in the region, and we've been able to work in collaboration with them and big brands like Uber and National Express and Birmingham Commonwealth Games to launch challenges to businesses in our region to address issues such as low carbon. So it's that kind of cross-sector cluster development that we know that we can help to drive and support. And particularly innovation in projects like the Positive Realities project in Coventry that we've been very happy to be involved in and be instrumental in. So again, it's looking at the creative industries beyond TV, beyond film, particularly with the games industry in Leamington Spa, and looking at how we can help to build the cluster and deliver for those. So if we could have the next slide. Just a few stats here. It's quite difficult to get the real impact because a lot of our partners are commercial partners, and they are. I know the figures, but they won't let me share them in a public forum. But I have been able to say absolutely, we've secured £3 million of public sector funding through that small amount of funding from the Combined Authority. It's tens of millions from the BBC, and it really is in terms of the partnership. In addition to that, we've secured the £50 million headquarters for Digbeth. And when I say we, it's an absolute collective effort. It's not just Create Central, it's the growth company particularly, and the work of the Combined Authority with the Mayor very much behind that. There's a public-private partnership that resulted in the Content Hub, £18 million in Digbeth. We could have the next slide. Just bringing in an event like the Creative Cities Convention, I think we put about £25,000 of British Film Institute money into that, which brought in £200,000 of investment. But it also means that, as Ed said, we are really starting to become a destination on the map in the West Midlands that is able to host big events like Creative Cities with all the major broadcasters from across the country, but also working with big brands, as I say. And with our development funds, for a specific investment that we put in, we are able to triple that in terms of the investment we can get back in from the BBC and Channel 4. So it's small things, we can leverage very easily with the cluster model that we've developed. And then just the next slide, please. The two big things I just wanted to flag were our boot camps. And Julie, I know you've been a supporter of these from the beginning, but again, through the adult education budget, we pioneered a completely different approach to industry-led boot camps. Market need was determined, so there were actual jobs at the end of them, and we've been able to get a significant amount of our boot campers, 90%, which is huge, into actual jobs into industry. So much so that we were noted as an exemplar of best practice in the BFI's National Skills Review. And next slide. And we are at BAFTA on Tuesday up for an international award for the boot camps as part of the Movers and Shakers Awards. So again, it's great to have that recognition. It's really important because we're coming from such a low base that we can able to demonstrate the impact of those small investments. And just one final slide before I hand back to Ed. And this happened the night before last, which was bringing Netflix to Coventry. Again, tiny amount of money that we put in, under £1,000 for an event. Of course, it's celebrating Debbie Isett, a Coventry filmmaker, and her fantastic global success, Christmas on Mistletoe Farm, which is currently out on Netflix. But what it did was enable us to bring talent in front of Netflix, and we know that commissions will result as a result of that. And then Ed's got two tiny, small new slides, next slides, and then we will hand back over to you, Andy. I'm not sure whether is there. We may have lost Ed from his dodgy connection. Ed talked about the evaluation. It was just a quick one there from Ed to say, you know, it's not us just patting ourselves on the back. We have been properly evaluated from Bot Consulting and WN Ready. And then the final slide, please. And what we're doing now is we have been mandated by the Growth Board back in June to develop a long-term plan for growth for our sector, which aligns with the main plan for growth. We're going to be launching that in April. We have significant bids in now with lots of public sector bodies, and Ed is working with his team of industry members to develop a commercial model for Create Central. So we're not just waiting for public sector support, we're actually looking for income from across the commercial and private sector as well. So I'll finish there. I think Ed's just trying to join us, but I will hand back over to you, Andy.
Thank you very much indeed, Susie and Ed. So let's throw it open. Any comments on what Create Central have produced, or indeed on the core paper? Let me just say about a response to the Create Central presentation. First of all, I have to say it's the most colourful presentation we've ever had at an economic event before. So, Corin, you're first.
No, just brilliant, and this is exactly how cluster work should work, isn't it? So well done with that. I love the boot camp model, and I think we can replicate that model across a whole bunch of different sectors that need young talent bringing forward. I'm also really glad you sort of name check the work taking place with Leamington Spa, because the correlation between the creative minds and thinkers in the games industry and other forms of printed and film media are absolutely massive, and we need to be creating a massive, gigantic pool to feed all the need for that over the next decade. And areas like Leamington Spa also need the intellectual capacity to develop, but also physical space building as well. So I'm really glad that that's on your radar. Excellent presentation, Susie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice feedback. And next to Peter.
Samuel, I'm gonna put my hands here up. Samuel has always been known as a cultural desert. I think I'm right in saying that. People look at us and think that we've got no culture in us at all. How can we ensure that some of the benefits that are attracted, which are mainly to big city environments, is actually dissipated, apart from the boot camp idea, the actual dissipation of work and sort of involvement across boroughs, particularly like Samuel. I actually do think that we should be doing more on the arts and culture. I think it's probably been sadly missed in the past, and we need to start benefiting from this. I know I would fight my own corner all the while, but I do really think that Samuel, we haven't got a theatre, for instance, in the area, not to speak of. There's a small one. It's lacking a lot in terms of that type of cultural activity, and I think there's a way to go. And if you can help us in any way, please let me know. But please let us know. Okay.
Thank you, Peter. That's very honourable of you, and I'm sure Susie can actually. So that's great. Okay. Next to Ian.
Yeah, just following on from what Peter's just said. I mean, there's some fantastic achievement here, and what I like to hear about it. I mean, the reference to, I think it was 80%, people going on further. Now that is really powerful, and I'm just wondering how we build on all this as a regional. How we can add together as a regional push on this. I mean, obviously, I'm very keen in Solihull. It's probably a bit longer term, but to build up our cultural and creative offer. I think it's something like up to 10% of employment is involved in that, and it's in some ways it's quite a very good entry for communities or people that perhaps don't have other means. So I think this success that we're seeing here, I'd just like to see how we can build on it, for both in terms of an overall strategy as a regional cultural destination, because it adds to tourism in some ways, very related to the offer that we have a region, and how we can, you know, build on that and percolate it for certainly some of the things I want to do.
Thank you, Ian. Next to Bob.
Yeah, picking up on that point, I mean, reading the paper, Create Central don't have a KPI with regard to job creation, and that's fine because I understand what they do and that's not really their role. But if you look in the plan for growth, it does talk about a cross-cutting development and intervention with regard to future skills pathway within the creative sector. Now, I make this point because I happen to be sitting next to the chief executive from the Hippodrome Theatre a couple of weeks ago, who lobbied me on the basis that they've lost an awful lot of people in the creative sector due to COVID, mainly on the basis that most of them were freelance, and that therefore a creative pathway for skills, he believes, is absolutely essential in the West Midlands. It's probably more a question for Julie, really, but I think it picks up on Ian Court's point, because the jobs can be created in the creative sector across the whole sector, including the theatre industry. So, you know, that would be a really important point for me from the growth plan, to understand what that skills pathway was going to be and how we were going to develop it in the West Midlands to be able to provide the people. I know Ed said that most of the people, a lot of the people are actually, the skills are developed in the West Midlands, they tend to go elsewhere, but it would be nice to know how we focus on that to take this stuff forward. I think it's an important element with regard to the whole employment opportunity.
If I may just respond to that, because it's an extremely good point. You know, we know working with the cultural sector is critical with skills. We with our boot camps, we've seen lots of people come from the theatre sector actually into our TV and film boot camps. We've just submitted a £2 million bid to the BFI to become one of their 7 skills clusters that they're going to be investing in over the next 3 to 6 years. And central to that bid is working with the cultural sector. So the Hippodrome are in there, all the key organisations, as you would expect. And we work in close partnership with Culture Central, because you're absolutely right. We need to retain the talent. We need to create the pathways. The boot camps are one way. There's other ways to do it as well. And so we've put together what we think is a really solid bid for that. We'll find out in a couple of months whether the BFI think that. But yeah, we're on the case. Thank you.
Thank you. Good response. Julie, your hand is up. I think you're muted, Julie.
It's Friday, sorry. Just a couple of points if I may. I think on the broader area, and Paul jumped over it a little in his paper, but one of the things that we're trying to do for Plan for Growth in each of the clusters is look at how the region as a whole can support clusters. So what's the skills offer, what's the land offer, what's the access to finance, how does that build on existing? So part of this is pulling together from across different organisations, locally, sub-regionally, to really pull that together. So for each of the clusters, we are looking at specific skills plans, skill support, some of those career pathways. On the creative one, it's been a really fascinating one because it's not like any other cluster. We have an awful lot of people currently getting trained in these areas. So 16 to 18-year-olds, for example, lots of provision. But what we find, and this is where I think boot camps have been particularly good, is it's access to opportunities, because it is a very freelance, networky industry. It is a lot of micro businesses, a lot of self-employed. So how do you connect people in? There aren't quite the big entry routes that you might find in construction or engineering. So a lot of what the boot camps have been about is working with industry, working with those opportunities, being really agile and getting people into jobs. Lots of creative. I mean, we've talked about the work with Create Central, but there's an awful lot going on across the region linked to Susie. And I think should give a bit of a shout out to Solihull College, who've been really instrumental in leading the way on this and getting people into all sorts of things, from MasterChef to oh gosh, some of the BBC work, working on the Commonwealth Games as well. There were an awful lot of people that took up opportunities there, young people in particular. So I think we can show you, perhaps again in a future update on Plan for Growth, more of that systemic approach, and then particularly for creative, how we are building and where boot camps, as Susie said, they're not the only offer, but they've been particularly successful at linking young people in particular, but older as well, into those actual real life opportunities and ways that help to create access.
Thank you. I'm sure the group will agree. That's exactly what we should do. That's great. So back to Ian C. You're also muted, Ian.
Sorry, I never thought I'd say this, but I just wonder, is there a strategy somewhere I've missed that links the clusters of boot camps to the regional and locational application, community engagement, and the skills pathways? I just, is this being pulled together? Because there is a lot in this, and a lot of it is very good.
Julie,
Yes.
do you want? Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes and no. I think we've deliberate. So we have Plan for Growth in which set out the kind of analysis, the evidence base, the clusters, and some of the opportunities, some of the barriers. I think we steered away from having a kind of all-encompassing plan as such, because I think, as Karen alluded to, that's not quite how clusters work. But what we're trying to do, and we can bring back an update, is mobilise regional resources, activities, both private and public sector, against it. What we can't do, be naive as to say, in 6 months' time, the creative industry will have created X, Y jobs. We don't control all of the factors, but we can say, these are the opportunities for us, or these are the barriers we're addressing, and make some progress that way. So it's not quite a plan or a strategy, if that makes sense, more of a sort of mobilisation effort, but we can set that out a little more in more detail if that would be helpful. You're on mute, Ian, sorry.
Done it again. It's the coffee I don't want to spill. I'm not looking for an all-encompassing, but there's stuff going on like investment zones, there's areas of deprivation. These things are really relative, and to connect these things up, I think, is very important in the current investment context, because this is an opportunity here to help communities as well.
May I just very, very briefly, in the major bid that we've put to the BFI, of the £2 million, 300,000 we have allocated to a really bold and ambitious outreach and engagement programme, so that we are going into communities across the region and genuinely trying to connect them with these opportunities. So it's not a sort of passive process of us expecting people to come to us. We know that we can work on the ground with community groups who are serving communities and are networked brilliantly. So that's, hopefully the BFI will agree with us, because we know that's the only way we can genuinely make a difference in terms of getting people connected into jobs that perhaps wouldn't have thought about that.
So Peter and North Solihull are going to be included in that then?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
I promise you they will be.
All right. Now, we've had a really good debate on this, but quite a bit of time. So is there anybody else who wants to comment on the Create Central presentation? Yeah, Peter, back to you briefly.
We'd really like to know when you're doing some of these activities out in our communities. We'd like to be engaged with them and actually really promote them. That's the first thing. The other point I was going to make relates to the report, and it's only because it's referenced in there, and that's about the LEP integration. That you've had a letter recently from the chair of the Black Country LEP. Yes. They're really worried, and we are really worried about the fact that basically that there are staff there that they're really uncertain. I think we need to get back with them with an integration plan and something positive pretty soon.
So I obviously agree with that sentiment. It is the last item on the agenda, and in the nicest way, I want to move on, so we've got plenty of time to talk about that. We've still got 3 major items to get to.
No
okay,
problem.
That's lovely. So I'm going to draw a line under the Create Central conversation. Thank you, Ed, Susie. I think what I also assume from the group is this idea of a deep dive in a sector is worthy of doing, because it's very fertile ground. So I've got a thumbs up on that. So we'll think about how we program those. But just before we move on, is there anything else on the paper in general? Because I would just like to abuse Chair's prerogative and just say there's one thing I would like to just call out. The stuff in it under para 6 on access to finance is so important. I know each of the LEPs have talked about this in the past, that I do think we now have to think how this group takes a strategic overview of that, and the LEPs won't be doing it. And it is an area where huge progress has been made, but huge opportunities still rest for the region. We are weaker than other comparable regions in some critical ways. You saw the numbers recently for angel activity, for example. If you could see the numbers around VC activity in our region compared, for example, to the Northwest, there is a lot of territory. And Julie, I know teams are working on this. I think we should draw this back as a separate agenda item for the future, if you don't mind. Yeah. Okay, but Sarah, your hand is up.
Yeah, great segue. Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to draw the attention to the access to finance point. So, and the point I just wanted to make was it does refer to bringing a report back, and I'd just be keen to understand the timescale of that, because this is a really important area, certainly from a Black Country LEP perspective, and it would be great if we could just sort of create the sort of streamlined integration of one organisation into another with regards to access to finance matters. So look forward to the report, support it coming back, but keen on timescales to be understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Very good. Okay, thank you all for your contributions on that one. Let's now move to item 10, which is the Trailblazer devolution deal and the international strategy. Now, I had got Jonathan down to introduce this, but I may be wrong about that, Julie.
I think Jonathan's down to do it. Are you online, Jonathan? If not, I can do it.
Jonathan is online.
Yeah, he is there.
Yeah, you will be
Thanks,
doing
Julie.
it. And then also, are you then going to bring in DIT? Shazad is also on the line, I know.
That's right. Thanks, Andy. So yeah, this will be a kind of several parter, and I'm conscious of your kind of comments about timing as well. So the purpose of this paper is really to cite Growth Board members on the process around the Trailblazer devolution activity following the kind of arrival of the new government, and in particular the Secretary of State. Some of that process has now been accelerated. So that is set out in the paper. One of the particular elements, though, that we did want to capitalise on quickly is that through some of the conversations with officials, there have been some areas or opportunities where, frankly, we don't have to wait for a kind of Trailblazer devolution moment, that there is a chance to be able to kind of move forward already. And one of those is particularly around the international strategy and international dimension. I think through conversations with Shazad and his colleagues in the Department for International Trade, there is a recognition, particularly, and I know we'll come on to it later with the integration of LEP functions, that there's an opportunity to kind of look afresh at what the region wants to achieve more broadly on that front. And so there is a proposal in the paper to be able to initiate activity on that. This is very much part of what the region wants to achieve in whole. So although there are some connections potentially with work that the growth company will do, it is not purely about the growth company's activity. It will also cover the roles of local authorities, universities, private sector groups, clusters, as we've been describing before. So yeah, just wanted to kind of flag up that opportunity. There are details in the report about the scope, but the ask is for the Economic Growth Board to kind of agree to the additional scoping work as discussed. But I know both Shazad and Katie and Matt want to flesh out the opportunity further.
Lovely. And I think, Katie, you might be next to pick up the baton, because I know the growth company are stepping into the breach, proposing to step into the breach on this.
That's absolutely right. Thank you, Andy. So our proposals, as you probably will be aware, for Trailblazer devolution deal are around the model of global West Midlands, and really taking the relationship that we've created as a region with governments over the Games, Time and Business and Tourism programme to the next level. And through that, we have 3 different areas of activity. So the first is around systems change. The second is around establishing fiscal instruments that we hope will help us land greater investment in the region. And the third is around launching flagship initiatives. And the particular point we want to draw out today is around that international strategy piece, which we think is fundamental to getting that system change with the government. So there are a number of reasons why we believe it's important to have, more important than ever now, for the region to have an international strategy. So firstly, our international reputation performance must outcompete those of other global regions and nations if we're going to deliver on the plan for growth ambitions, and if we are going to realise the ambitions of local places as well. Research that we've done have shown that work over the Commonwealth Games period has started to move the dial slightly when it comes to perceptions of the region, but we know there's an awful lot more we need to do to build momentum on that, and we need to have focus around that. There are also some areas where we know we have, over a period of time, underperformed. So international trade is one of those. So I think having a particular concerted regional view of what we need to do around that area will be incredibly helpful. We also know, for example, post-Brexit that we need to do a lot more to attract global academic talent. So again, that's a really important focus through this strategy. But there are also huge strengths for the region too. And what we would like to do through this piece of work is really see how we can harness those, both the assets that we have, the sector strengths that we've been talking about, all the fantastic networks of our universities, cultural institutions, private sector businesses as well, onto one set of priorities, so we can really try to align our resources. And I think also the work that we certainly as a growth company have been doing more recently has been very much focused around the Commonwealth countries. And while some of those I'm sure will remain really important for us as a region going forward, it's important that we use a strategy process to look at outside those Commonwealth countries and see really where should we be putting our effort and our resource. And I think the other part that's really key for us as well is using the strategy to then get a delivery plan, and one that we all can kind of buy into and be able to align our collective strengths and resources to. And I think, given all the pressures and all the challenges we'll be facing economically in as individual institutions, having that alignment is going to be incredibly important. And for us, we think having DIT at the heart of that and creating a strategy that's very much co-developed with them will be critical as well, so that we can make sure that what we're doing as a region supports those national priorities as well as delivering the local and regional ones too. So before asking Shazad just to comment, the other point I think is really important to make is this has got to be a strategy that is built from bottom up with extensive collaboration and engagement with all of your organisations and a multitude of other partners that sit outside the Economic Growth Board as well. So I think the engagement piece is as important as the data and research element of this too. So there will be an awful lot of opportunity for you to get involved and to put your thoughts in terms of priorities and etc. through this process. Well, I will pause there, happy to take questions afterwards, but certainly welcome Shazad's reflections as well, please.
Thank you.
Just explain, Shazad, your role, because I'm not sure everybody will know.
No, certainly not. So I'm the Midlands Director for Trade Investment from the Department for International Trade. So overall remit for both East and West Midlands on trade and investment. So probably the most senior official on the ground, as it were, outside of obviously the Secretary of State, who has overall responsibility for trade and investment across the whole of English regions and nations. So just building upon the great work, I think it can't be understated that DIT has never worked more closely with the Combined Authority and the Growth Company than over the duration of the Commonwealth Games with the Business and Tourism Programme. And I think it's fantastic that we can coalesce around an international strategy. And I think the time is right now to do that outside of the Trailblazer devolution deal. I think it goes without saying, we need to refresh our strategy, look at our capabilities and our strengths as a region in consultation with everyone on this call and wider, to really think about our sectoral strengths, where they're emerging, where they're dominant, and actually where the real opportunities lie. And obviously we did that through the Commonwealth lens during the Games period, but as Katie rightly says, we need to think wider and further. And again, we have been impacted more than other regions have in terms of our exporting deficit, as it were, and we need to think about that strategy together. So I welcome the opportunity to work with the Combined Authority and the Growth Company about refreshing our strategy, understanding where the data leads us to and our consultation leads us to about a 3-year shared delivery plan. So we want to co-develop that with yourselves, and we want to co-deliver that with yourselves. And I think we can get cracking on with that using the expertise that certainly my department has, but certainly the expertise around this table here today as well. But just endorse that, and we'll be looking for your endorsement to crack on with that piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you, very clear and heartening, Shazad. So let me just start open any observations on the paper. Do I take that colleagues will be comfortable? Corinne, you're first.
Yeah, of course. I'm a big fan of the internationalisation agenda by the Growth Company. I think it's a really, really important piece of work, and one that we've been looking at for a few years. So great to see DIT working with them. I would say make the use of our networks as well. The Global Chamber Network has got, on average, networks around 150, 200 businesses based in over 70 major cities around the world. So it's businesses talking to businesses, and I'd love this strategy to feed into that. The second part is the big stuff's brilliant, really important. We do that at regional level. For small businesses, trading at the moment is absolutely awful, and we've seen many of our smaller businesses never trade less. People trade in small amounts, just giving up trading at all. And we don't look at importing enough. Most businesses buy things in, sell things out all the time. So there's a nuts and bolts of trade needs a real focus as well. So while it's brilliant to do the big stuff, and I absolutely back that with all my heart, let's not forget the smaller businesses who are really struggling at the moment.
Too true. Next in courts.
Thank you very much, and I absolutely support the development of the international strategy, massively important to the region, as indeed is national promotion of trade and the local element, which sadly gets missed off the agenda while we import our lettuces from Chile or whatever. Can I just come on to something else, which is something, the progress of the devolution deal. I know masses of work is going on about that, and it's great to see it. But at the end of 2.6, there's words outside of that priority list that have not been successfully progressed, but that point will be taken off the table for this deal and pursued in a slower timeline. Now, what I see in 2.5 is the usual compartmentalisation of various like housing, transport, skills, fiscal devolution, net zero, and retrofit and international trade. You know, now bringing together some of these, which I think is actually needed, it is important. But the draft that officers showed me, you know, there's the investment zones in out, shake it, like, you know, it's. But we put in proposals, you know, for EBNS, you know, suggesting that the whole approach to public sector reform needs to be, and local communities need to be addressed on a local level. And I was really quite disappointed to see the attention given to that aspect. Now, the truth is we don't have solutions and we don't have proposals, but what we do want is to explore the potential, certainly in some, you know, family and health thing in terms of what we can do with community, because it directly relates to things like retrofit, it directly relates to local services. So even if we can't find a solution, I really want us to signpost this and not just park it out of the agenda, because the one paragraph was just not enough considering the amount of work we put into, for instance, EBNS.
So I think I should probably answer that, Ian, and as you say, I can't give a full answer, but I think I should say what I can. The situation with the minister responsible, who Michael Gove has deputed to do this, is every item on the list still remains in the negotiation. I think what the officers are flagging in 2.6 is Gove is indicating that we won't necessarily get everything over the line in the timetable he's given. We want to get maximum, and we certainly have taken nothing off the table. But this is what he's saying about things that we don't achieve. So that, I think, and is why that is in there. And we have certainly, so everybody knows, reaffirmed our commitment that we go back to levelling up zones with the demise of investment zones in some places. So I'm sorry, it's an incomplete answer, Ian, but that's the status of the discussion with the ministers at the moment. Yeah. Okay, and I'm actually with the minister again on Tuesday, the Levelling Up Minister, Dehenia Davison, to go through the negotiation status. Right, next is Mike.
Thanks, Andy. Just a small but I think really important point about the scope of international strategy.
Yeah.
Quite rightly, we're looking at new markets outside of Europe. But I think another piece of work that needs to be done is how do we engage with the new Europe post-Brexit? Because, you know, adjacency for suppliers and all the other things is still going to be a critical matter. And I think people are still a little confused about, you know, are we still interested in Europe? What are the mechanisms to do business, both FDI and exports, into the new relationship that we have with Europe?
Yeah, that is definitely right. Thank you. You picked that one up, Jonathan Shazad. Yes, lovely, lovely. Peter, you're next.
We know what strengths that the West Midlands has in terms of production, GDP, and what have you. And we know the weakness is international trade, and that's how we deal with it. If this was going to be a real trailblazing devolution deal, why aren't we getting the Department of International Trade actually moving to our region? If we're the region that needs to be how can I put it, kick-started. Why don't they come here? It's obvious that the move of DLUC to Wolverhampton, to my mind, has benefited the region.
Yeah,
I think this would benefit the region. It would benefit the country if they were localised. And we're going to make an offer here, localised to Samwell. Base yourself here with the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and this is where we can go out to other countries and actually sell ourselves. At the end of the day, you've said that the India mission was one of the most comprehensive and successful missions that you've come across. Why don't you match that by actually acknowledging that West Midlands is where you ought to be based? It would send the right message out to people.
Shazaz, I'm going to put you on the spot. Go on. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, so the second economic compass for DIT followed the Treasury and went up to Darlington. Look, from my perspective, I would have loved for it to have landed here in Birmingham. We do have a presence in Birmingham, so just right opposite New Street Station. I would love for our footprint to increase, but we do take a place-based approach. So I have both a site within Birmingham and within Nottingham. So, and all the people that work on the international trade, certainly for my team, are locally based, as it were, live regionally as well. But you're right, the second economic campus didn't land here like it did with DLUC over in Wolverhampton, unfortunately.
But I think we need to think about what lies behind Peter's observation about the real integration of the function within the region. Now, we've got a good start, as you say, but I'm sure we can do more actually. So let's even if we don't get a huge move of a big office, let's think about what lies behind the observation. Okay,
certainly.
Thank you.
I can pick up.
Okay, any other? Go on, Shazad.
I was just going to pick up on Corin's point about smaller businesses and the exporters of the future and the importing point. And Corin, you're totally right. Look, our importers of the now are the exporters of the future, and smaller businesses are our future pipeline. That's where our big unicorns potentially may come from. So I was just the other day working with some ethnic minority business owners that actually are really pre high growth at this stage. And we are looking as a department of working more closely with those grassroots organizations, which we know aren't capable already at this stage to export, but building that domestic expertise in terms of exporting being a fundamental pillar of all businesses' strategy going forward. And I think that's what this work will highlight. So, obviously, if the group and the board were to endorse that work, we would highlight those as points of action, certainly.
Okay, so thank you to Jonathan, Shazaz and Katie. I'm taking that everyone is comfortable for this work to go ahead, indeed hungry that it should be done as quickly as possible. So thank you all. Okay, to item number 11 on the agenda, which is Mike and the Innovation Accelerator. Lots of work going on. And Mike, I think you're going to give us a relatively quick update on where we are.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andy. This, in many ways, is a status report because we had the substantive discussion at the previous Economic Growth Board. Just to remind people that we are getting assurance for the kind of selection process on quality from Innovate UK and to check for quality, but also from the Combined Authority to check that the linkage and contribution to the plan for growth is there. So there's a kind of external assurance process going on. We're now down to 21 bids, as the paper says. We're significantly oversubscribed, which is a good thing. And I think there's a flow chart in the paper that just demonstrates we're not going to forget those bids that don't get through this particular gateway. The focus is very much on cross-sector, cross-business, and other research institutes, including the universities and the catapults, and very much to the point that's come out in all the previous papers about across the region. And just to reassure all the councillors, each at least one local authority has a a proposal in the 21, and I think there are many more going across, but that some of these will impact across the whole combined authority. The final point is we have a very compressed timetable for a variety of reasons. We're working on the assumption that the money's there, and we need to commission projects from April next year to get them really moving fast. So I'll leave it to Jonathan and Julia to explain, the mechanisms of how, after the selection panel that takes place later this month, the outcome of that gets approved by this board, so that we can move to due diligence and actually get the successful bidders working from April next year.
That's excellent, Mike, and it's really good process gone on, very clear. Julie or Jonathan, do you need to add anything?
So all that I'd add from Mike's kind of prompt really is just to say that the Innovation Board is due to meet just before Christmas to provide recommendations for those kind of regional priorities within the 33 million funding envelope. The decision will be taken by the CA Board on the 13th of January. That is because this is a kind of financial decision that kind of has the financial route. That will be made because there is then the kind of due diligence that is needed and kind of innovate announcement. So that's likely to be a kind of private decision, but obviously all of the CA Board will kind of be informed, and it will be based on the recommendation of the Innovation Board.
Brilliant, that's clear. Ian, back to you.
I want to make 2 points here. One, I don't know the detail of this, I'm afraid, but I'm advised that Solihull is not listed as a concentration of health tech and med tech in the plan for growth, and I ask myself why. We, are committed to this. I mean, you look at the health and innovation zone that we have pitched for Arden Cross, the best located place in the country, which is extremely relevant. So. And we've got a lot of other stuff going on in the borough. So we have a real commitment to this sector. That's the first point. The second point I'd make is of general application. It's something that, Andy, you've heard me talk about before. The government is putting in 100 billion, last TVs, it could be much more, into HS2 project, and yet I'm afraid we just forget it all the time. Is it relevant to innovation? Well, if you look at what we show ministers when we come up, the tech that is going into building HS2, it's extraordinary, and it will be of a lot of relevance to other things. I mean, when Ukraine needs to be rebuilt, some of there's applications and things, all sorts of potential opportunities, and yet we miss it. Every minister we've taken up, we take to the site, and they're all frankly overwhelmed by the scale and success of the technical operations. And I would have thought when we're pitching in anything, it's our leadership role in this that we should be saying we can do this, we can do other things. It may not be in a test tube, but it's of relevance to the success of this region and the pitch we're making. And I would really urge officers to start taking this more seriously.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you want to comment on the first point that Ian makes? You might need to follow up offline, but the second one, any observations as to how that links to what's written here?
Yeah, on the second point, I think that this goes to not just how the decisions made around the Innovation Accelerator, but that kind of overall narrative that the region has about innovation. So, Innovation Accelerator is a relatively kind of modest element. It's much more broadly, and I know this is something that kind of Mike has been passionate about and driven through the Innovation Board. It's about how we tell the story of all of the activity, innovation R&D activity that happens kind of right across the region, and in particular then the commercial impact that it makes at the moment, but the greater potential commercial impact it can make in future. And I know that there are lots of aspects to that, including the roles of the catapult, major kind of projects like HS2, some of the international trade and the kind of links with strategic companies that we kind of bring into the region. So that there is much there. And I know, Mike, that's something that you've been kind of stewarding too. But I think the answer is not just in the accelerator, it's part of that overall narrative.
Yeah, I'd make two comments. I think Ian's absolutely right. We don't have a clear, simple narrative that all of us can talk to off the same hymn sheet, and I've been challenging the authority and the officials to come up with something on that point. And the second point, I think we shouldn't forget that this is a start of, if we're successful with the innovation accelerator and we can satisfy central government that we've got the local competence to handle this, it will release, as long as the white paper isn't significantly changed, a much more significant pot of money that the region will benefit from the UKRI budget, which is, you're talking over the plan period, hundreds of millions of pounds. So this is like an interview to get us across the line to demonstrate our capability. And once we've demonstrated that, we can go forward. But your point is absolutely valid. If we don't have this clear narrative to communicate consistently over time of what our strengths are, it will make our bidding process more difficult, in my view.
That's right. And just, I'm very conscious of time, Julie, so I want you to be very brief.
Yeah, very, very quickly. No, thank you for that. And as you might expect, we're working on a narrative. We do want to bring it back to a future meeting that reflects all of the points being made, but also focuses on that prize ahead as well. So bear with us.
Excellent. So that's a clear action that we pull forward. Ian, thank you for prompting it. Mike, anything else you want to add?
No, thank you.
No. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you. And we look forward to the outcome of that coming to the board after Christmas. Thank you all for what's gone into it. Right, now then item 12 on the board agenda is, of course, the work programme. I don't propose to stop on this. It's there for notice, and it will shape itself a little bit more after 1 or 2 decisions today, actually. So there we go. Yeah, but any hands, if there is any dissent over any of it? No. Okay, thank you very much. So 13, we have to formally go into private session. I'm not aware of any member of the press or public on the line looking down, but if you were,